Welcome to listen to my podcast today. We have to fight for our own justice and rights. That's all the colors people like I have to say to myself each day, every day. The racial discriminations happen everywhere in this world, especially in the US. There are four different types of racial discriminations that you never consider about it. I will talk you now. Probably you heard about some, probably you didn't hear about it. The first one is direct racial discrimination. The second one is indirect racial discrimination. Third one is harassment. The last one probably is unfamiliar ones, which is called victimizations. Racial discrimination is pretty terrible events happening for all the black peoples and all other colored peoples as well. When we hear about racial discriminations, civil rights movements and Black Lives Matter movements coming directly into our head. The history of civil rights movement, which is began with 1960s. So the 1960s, it is become a long-term struggles for social justice, and they gain enough equal rights under the law for Black Americans communities. Some people being violented, some people being accused, even some people being abused by different attitudes. This time of periods, African American peoples want to show in front of the world that we want to be independent, we want to be freedom under the law of segregations, under the law of Jim Crows. In the conclusion that United States Supreme Court, which tells that although it can be separated, but they cannot be equal anymore. In 1955, civil rights movement finally cannot be standing at this point. There is actives named as Dr. Martin King Luther Jr. starting to proclaim his own opinions. There is a shortcut for that when you probably heard about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Let's hear what he wants us to learn about it. Okay, we heard about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his speech called I Have a Dream that he wants everybody to be equal. Do you think this will be plausible to happen? I don't think that's pretty a quick way to do so. For the Black Lives Matter movement, it happens pretty recent ones and is still popular now. Former President Obama is kind of defend for Black Lives Matter movements.
I think the reason that the organizers used the phrase Black Lives Matters was not because they said they were suggesting nobody else's lives matter. Rather, what they were suggesting was there is a specific problem that is happening in the African American community that's not happening in other communities. And that is a legitimate issue that we've got to address. We as a society, particularly given our history, have to take this seriously. And one of the ways of avoiding the politics of this and losing the moment is everybody just stepping back for a second and understanding that the African American community is not just making this up. And it's not just something being politicized. It's real. And there's a history behind it. And we have to take it seriously. And it's incumbent then on the activists to also take seriously the tough job that police have.
Thanks for former President Obama to share about his opinions about defending for former Obama for the defending for Black Lives Matter movements. I got couple voice clips from my friends to think about the voice for the Black Lives Matter movement. If we have time, let's to listen to their opinions as well.
It is important to learn about the civil rights movement because it is an essential aspect in American history. The movement was what began to have people to finally realize that racial segregation and discrimination against African Americans is a reality, and that this movement was what would lead change in the injustice and inequality in America that African Americans face on a daily basis. And it's important to learn about the struggle they had to go through to be where they are today and are still fighting, as seen with the Black Lives Matter movement. It shows how the civil rights movement was only the beginning of an unending battle in combating against racial discrimination in our society.
For me, I think the civil rights movement and the BLM movement are necessary steps that we have to take on our way of pursuing equality and humanity. In order to make an improvement and to make a change, effort is required on both sides. Not only do minority groups have to try voice themselves, the majority also needs to keep an open mind on things. And after decades and centuries of power imbalance and tension, we certainly cannot expect things to change overnight. And what we can do is just to continue speaking up and know that even if we don't get an immediate result, as long as we're still trying, we are still getting closer and closer to our destination.
These are my two friends who come from different countries, who have different backgrounds to think about the Black Lives Matter movements and civil rights movement towards their opinions. To draw back to the conclusion, I want to say that for my personal opinions that Black Lives Matter movements and civil rights movement is a pretty terrible thing. We have to be considerate about it wherever we have to face in the future times, or to learn, let the future generations to learn about why it is so important for us to be concluded. By ending of our podcast, I want to finish to give you a sense of the we shall overcome. For end of this podcast, I'm especially thanking for Denise, who coming from University of Richmond, who come from the New York cities, and also I have friends from the second voice, from Demi. She come from Johns Hopkins University, who come from Shanghai. These two persons are my two guests for these speakers. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy for the podcast.